He left me for a supermodel and called it an upgrade. Now she's chasing my billionaire husband behind his back. Funny how karma doesn't knock, it walks in wearing diamonds. It happened on a Wednesday. Not that the day matters, but I remember it vividly because everything after felt like a blur. One minute we were sitting across from each other at our favorite Thai place. And the next, he was telling me that I wasn't enough. "I need someone who can match my lifestyle," he said calmly, like he was discussing the weather. My fork froze halfway to my mouth. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him right. "I'm sorry, what?" I asked, hoping I'd misunderstood, that maybe he meant something else. He sighed. "It's just, we're in different places. I'm growing and you're—" He paused, searching for a gentler word, but what he landed on didn't make it any better. Comfortable. Comfortable. As if all the years we spent building a life together, supporting his startup dreams, while I juggled 2 jobs, had been some kind of lazy decision. As if comfort was a flaw. And then he said her name. Mila, a supermodel. Not a metaphor, not an exaggeration. A real supermodel, the kind with 2 million followers. Legs that went on for days, and a face that seemed handcrafted by the gods. They'd met at a luxury tech event he had gone to for networking. He had mentioned her once in passing, but I'd thought nothing of it. Until now. "She gets it," he said, his eyes glinting with admiration. "She understands the world I'm building." The world he was building. As if I hadn't been there hammering nails and laying bricks the whole time. I didn't cry, not then. I sat there and listened to the man I loved reduce me to a stepping stone. I watched him, suddenly a stranger, talk about this new life he was chasing, like it had nothing to do with the one we'd built together. He left the restaurant without looking back. I paid the bill. And when I got home, the silence in our apartment was louder than any scream I could have let out. His side of the closet was already half empty. I stood in the doorway, staring at the space where his suits used to hang, and something inside me cracked. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was humiliation. I felt discarded, like a coat that no longer fit the season. But under the pain, buried beneath the ache, something else began to grow. Resolve. Not the petty kind that makes you text your ex at 2 a.m. or post thirst traps to make him jealous. This was different. It was quiet, steady. A vow I whispered to myself as I lay awake that night staring at the ceiling. He will regret this. Not because I'd try to ruin him. Not because I wanted revenge. But because one day, he would look at me and realize what he lost. And by then, it would be too late. He chose a woman with perfect skin and a famous name. But I was going to become the kind of woman no man would ever dare to underestimate again. After he left, there were days I didn't recognize myself. I'd stare into the mirror and see a woman who looked hollow. Eyes dull, shoulders hunched, makeup untouched on the bathroom shelf. My world had cracked open, and everything I had built, every ounce of effort and love I had poured into our life, felt like it had vanished with a single sentence. I need someone who can match my lifestyle. But I didn't stay broken. Something strange happens when you hit rock bottom. The silence becomes sacred. You hear your own voice again, raw, unsure, but yours. And slowly I began to listen. I started small, morning walks with music in my ears, cooking meals just for myself, not because I had to feed someone else. I dusted off my resume, applied for jobs I had once been too afraid to reach for, and said yes to roles I didn't feel fully ready for. And guess what? I grew into every single one of them. I didn't get a revenge body. I got a strong one. Not for the pictures. For me. I swapped wine-soaked nights for early mornings at the gym. Not because I wanted to post about it, but because I wanted to feel alive again. The circles under my eyes faded. The weight in my chest lightened. And the woman in the mirror started to come back, stronger, smarter, and with eyes that no longer begged for someone to choose her. But here's the truth. I wasn't doing it for him. There was no fantasy in my mind where he saw me and fell to his knees in regret. I wasn't chasing revenge. I was chasing something far more dangerous, peace. I wanted to wake up and not feel like I had something to prove. I wanted to walk into a room and not shrink. I wanted to build a life that felt like mine again. No compromises, no borrowed dreams. And somewhere along the way, while I was too busy rebuilding my own world to notice who was watching, someone noticed. I met him at a charity art gala downtown, one I was invited to, by a friend who practically dragged me out of the house. I wore a simple black dress I had almost talked myself out of. No designer label, no drama, just confidence. And maybe that was what caught his eye. He wasn't loud or flashy. In fact, I didn't even know who he was at first. We stood in front of the same abstract painting, and he leaned in slightly and said, "You're the only one here who's not pretending to understand this." I laughed, genuinely, for the first time in weeks. We spent the rest of the evening talking, not about money or status, but books, childhood stories, and what we'd do if we weren't afraid to fail. He didn't brag. He didn't name drop, but there was something unmistakable in his presence. Calm, grounded, and deeply intelligent. It wasn't until later that I found out who he really was. A tech visionary, CEO of a company that was making headlines. A billionaire, technically speaking, though he wore it like a whisper, not a crown. But more than anything, he was kind. And it was that kindness that pulled me in, not the net worth. He didn't want me to shrink or chase or prove. He listened, he saw me. He asked about me. One evening, over dinner on his terrace overlooking the bay, he reached for my hand and said, "You know, there's something extraordinary about you. Not just beauty, power, quiet, undeniable power." I smiled, not out of pride, but because I knew he was right. Not because he said it, but because I had finally started to believe it myself. And for the first time I realized I didn't need the man who left me. I had become the woman he could never keep up with. They say love finds you when you're not looking for it. I never used to believe that. It sounded like something people told themselves to feel better when life wasn't going their way. But with him, it was exactly that. It crept in quietly, in the spaces between long conversations and silent comforts, until suddenly, I couldn't remember a version of myself that didn't include him. Our relationship moved fast, but it didn't feel rushed. It felt natural, like stepping into sunlight after years of clouds. He didn't fall for my appearance, though he complimented me often. He loved the way I thought, the way I challenged him, the way I could sit in silence without needing to fill it. And I fell for his integrity, his patience, his rare, grounded sense of self that didn't need to prove anything to anyone. 3 months after that art gala, he proposed on a quiet beach at sunset. No audience, no photographers, just us, the waves, and a single ring he'd designed himself. I said yes, not because of the ring, or his name, or the private jet that waited behind us, but because, for the first time, I felt truly chosen. Not for convenience or image or ambition, but for love. The wedding was everything I never knew I wanted. Elegant, intimate, and so far from the noise of who I used to be. No cameras, no curated Instagram moments, just a handful of people who mattered, watching us begin again. And somewhere between my vows and the laughter that followed our first dance, I caught a glimpse of my old life from a distance, like a dream I'd finally woken up from. Suddenly, I was living in a world he could only dream of. My ex, I mean. The man who left me for the model. The man who once said I wasn't fitting for the future he imagined. And as fate would have it, that future and mine were about to cross in the most unexpected way. It was a charity gala, one of those glittering events where everyone important showed up wearing carefully calculated indifference. I hadn't even planned to attend until my husband, convinced me to come. "You'll light up the room," he said, pressing a kiss to my shoulder. "You always do." I walked in on his arm, dressed in a gown that hugged me like confidence and whispered quiet power. Not a scream for attention, just the soft certainty of a woman who had nothing left to prove. And that's when I saw them. Him and her. The supermodel stood beside him like a porcelain statue. Gorgeous. Polished, untouchable. He looked older somehow. Not in the physical sense, but in the way people do when life hasn't been kind to them. His smile was tight. His posture forced. And hers, well, she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at my husband. At first, I thought it was a glance. One of those fleeting looks people give when they recognize someone they admire. But it lingered. Her eyes traced him with interest, with curiosity, with something too familiar to be innocent. And my husband? He didn't notice. He was too busy whispering a joke in my ear that made me laugh so loudly a few people turned to look, including them. That was the moment. My ex's eyes locked on mine. I didn't smirk. I didn't gloat. I simply met his gaze and held it, long enough for him to see what he had thrown away. Then I turned my attention back to the man beside me, the one who saw my worth before the world did. And as the orchestra played and champagne glasses clinked around us, I realized something. I hadn't just won. I had outgrown the game. I didn't want to believe it at first. That night at the gala, I had brushed it off, told myself I was imagining things. Maybe she looked at him that way because he was powerful, successful, magnetic in that quiet, grounded way that made people lean in without realizing. Maybe it wasn't personal. Maybe she didn't remember who I was. But as the evening went on, the glances became bolder. She was draped in something sheer and shimmering, every move calculated, her smile impossibly perfect. But what struck me wasn't her beauty. It was her audacity. The same woman who had locked eyes with my then-boyfriend and taken him without hesitation now stood just a few feet away, locking eyes with my husband. Like history had given her permission to try again. She didn't just glance. She lingered. And when we were introduced, when she turned those icy blue eyes on me with a polite smile that didn't reach them, she said, "So you're his wife," like it tasted strange in her mouth. I smiled sweetly, holding my husband's arm a little tighter. "Yes, and you're Mila, right? Lovely to finally meet you." She laughed. A breathy, practiced sound. The world's small, isn't it? Yes, and apparently so was her concept of boundaries. I watched her throughout the evening. She laughed at his jokes, even the dry ones, and touched his arm just a little too long. She tilted her body toward him like I wasn't even there, like I had faded into the background. My husband, for his part, was cool, polite, unreadable. He didn't encourage her, but he didn't shut her down either. He maintained the same diplomatic charm he showed to anyone in public, but I knew him. I knew the way his jaw tensed slightly when something irritated him. I saw that tension, hidden beneath the surface. Still, I said nothing that night. Didn't want to seem jealous or insecure. I told myself she was just playing games, trying to provoke me. But the next morning, something gnawed at me. A feeling I couldn't shake. So I did something I had never done in our entire relationship. I opened his phone. It wasn't locked. He had nothing to hide. At least that's what I thought. And that's when I saw them. The messages. They weren't from him. He hadn't replied. But she had written. Dozens of messages. "Last night was fun. We should catch up sometime, just the two of us. I can't stop thinking about you. I know you felt it too. You don't belong with her. You're meant for something more. Remember?" I scrolled through them with a numbness I didn't expect. There was no anger, not yet. Just a cold realization. She had been chasing him. The same woman who had taken my ex with a toss of her hair and a calculated smile was now circling back. For my husband. But this time, she wasn't texting someone who was waiting to leave. She was texting a man who hadn't replied. Not once. Still, my hands trembled. Not because I didn't trust him, but because I realized something even more terrifying. Some people don't stop. Some people don't care who they hurt, or how many times they rewrite the same story. And Mila? She was trying to steal a second chapter from me. But this time, I wasn't a girl watching her world fall apart. I was a woman standing in the middle of a life I had built back stronger. A woman married to a man who didn't need reminding of what he had. I put the phone down, took a deep breath, and walked into the sunlit kitchen where he stood, coffee in hand, looking up at me with the same calm eyes I had fallen for. I smiled. "Want to hear something funny?" I asked. He raised an eyebrow. "Always." And I told him. "All of it." He listened, quiet, then leaned in and kissed my forehead. "She must think I'm the same kind of man your ex was," he said. "Let's prove her wrong." And just like that, the past lost its power. I wasn't expecting to see him again, at least not like that. The last time we'd crossed paths, he had been untouchable, smug, his arm wrapped around Mila like she was the prize he had upgraded to. I had been quiet then, still raw from the betrayal, still piecing myself together behind the smile I forced onto my face. But that version of me no longer existed. Now, I stood at the entrance of a luxury charity gala, my hand gently resting on my husband's arm, the soft shimmer of my dress catching the chandelier light just right. The cameras flashed as we walked in. Not because of who I used to be, but because of who I had become. Beside me stood a man whose name opened doors in boardrooms and turned heads in social circles. But more than that, he was kind, solid. He saw me for everything I was and never once asked me to shrink. We were halfway through the evening when I saw him. My ex. He looked thinner somehow, tired. There was a tightness around, his eyes that hadn't been there before. Just an empty seat and a glass of untouched champagne. He caught sight of me just as I was laughing at something my husband whispered. Our eyes met. And in that single silent moment I saw it. Recognition, regret, ruin. He stood slowly, weaving through the tables like a man on a mission. My husband turned to speak to a colleague, unaware of the storm quietly approaching behind us. "Hey," my ex said softly, as if we were still on familiar terms. I turned, offering a polite but distant smile. Hello? He hesitated. Can we talk? My husband glanced over, sensing the shift. I gave him a subtle nod. I'll be right back. We stepped away to a quiet corner, the hum of conversation fading into the background. I didn't know, he said, voice tight. About her and your husband. I raised a brow. And? He ran a hand through his hair, clearly unraveling. She left me, said she was bored, and then I found out she'd been chasing him, your husband, for months. He trailed off. You just thought she was loyal because you were the one she left me for? I asked, calm and unshaken. He flinched. I made a mistake. I studied him for a moment. There it was. The broken pride. The realization that the woman he threw everything away for had been nothing, more than a mirror, shiny on the surface, empty underneath. He reached for my hand. I didn't move. Please, he said. Can we talk? Really talk? Maybe. Fix this? I laughed quietly, not with cruelty, but with clarity. You left me for her, I said, meeting his eyes fully. And I moved on with someone better. His face paled. I could have said more, could have reminded him of the nights I cried myself to sleep, of the months I spent rebuilding my life. But I didn't need to. Because some revenge comes loud, with shouting matches and public scenes. Mine came wrapped in elegance, in calm strength, in a diamond ring that wasn't bought for show but given in love. It came with me turning, walking back toward a man who had never made me feel like I had to earn his attention. As I slid my hand into my husband's and he instinctively laced our fingers together, I felt my ex's gaze still burning behind me. But I didn't look back, because karma had already done what I never needed to.